Well, my dear friends, it's Monday, and I have a very, very serious question for you. What does horror mean to you? What exactly does it mean to you? Is it men coming out of the darkness and trying to stab you to death? Or is it something different? Is it merely the fear of the unknown, the darkness, the things that you cannot see and cannot make sense of? Tonight's two stories ask that very same question. What is horror for you? What makes you terrified? What scares you to death? Another fantastic one from Dr. Creepen's Vault and another one from Reddit, NOSLEEP, for you this evening. Well, my dear friends, it's Monday and it's once again time to sit back and relax with your favourite drink and listen. We came to call it The Visitor. We called it that because it never did anything more than visit us. It never tried to attack us or kill us. Somehow, in a weird way, that would have been so much better than what it actually did. If that sounds confusing, you're not alone. The only reason we know it exists is because 2 months into moving into this house, we noticed a disturbing pattern play out. It always happened the same way. My wife and I would be woken up in the middle of the night by our two boys, Levi and Judah, screaming at the top of their lungs. Those were always the nights where we'd wake up covered in sweat, our throats so raw that it felt like we'd just swallowed glass, and slightly nauseated. The first time, we thought it was just a stomach bug, but by the 5th or 6th time, we decided we should get professional help. We went to a mold guy, thinking there was mold in the house somewhere we didn't know of, but we couldn't find a thing. Then we went to a doctor to see if there was something physically wrong, but the only thing they found was that our throats were the rawest they'd ever seen. They told us that the wear and tear on our throats were consistent with someone screaming for minutes on end. They were the ones who recommended we try a sleep therapist, since the symptoms seemed to be presenting themselves in our sleep. The sleep therapist, Dr. Hargrove, was very eager to take us on. She found our case fascinating and rare, because typically adults don't struggle with night terrors as frequently as we were experiencing, let alone at the same time. But in order to learn more, we needed to record our sleeping habits, so she gave us a video recorder. We actually never ended up watching those videos though, at least not the ones we recorded for her. We gave her the tapes after a week, and the day we were supposed to receive a call from her with what she'd found on the tapes, we got a call from the police instead. Apparently, Dr. Hargrove's secretary found her in her office, in her chair, slumped on her desk in front of a computer she'd pulverized with a hammer, before turning it on herself and bashing in her own skull. They told us that it seemed like she'd tried to bludgeon her eyes out, as most of the impact sites on her skull were focused around the eye sockets. They called us because they were able to piece together enough of the CD within the computer to see our names written on it, and wanted to know if we knew anything. We didn't, but we thought it was about time we did. So we got our own video recorder, and the very next day, we saw it for the first time. At around 2:14 in the morning, the visitor strolled into our bedroom so casually, it was like it was walking into a conference call. It wore a long, black robe with no sleeves, and a hood drawn up over a face so white, it was practically shone in the darkness. There were pitch-black rings surrounding its bloodshot eyes, and a grin poured across its face from ear to ear. But it didn't seem real, like it wasn't a real face, but a mask. The moment it entered our room, the video recording blipped and grew slightly staticky. It stopped at the foot of our bed, turned to face us, and stood still as a statue for 10 whole minutes, unblinking, unbreathing. While that in and of itself is shocking, what truly appalled us was our reactions. True to the doctor's words, we watched the screen as Dara and I shot upright in our bed the moment it turned to face us, and we just screamed. We screamed and screamed and screamed for the entire time it was there. We could see our bodies visibly trembling in horror, shaking like we were seizing, and our shoulders heaving as we took deep breaths. But we wouldn't look away from it. Even though we were obviously horrified of the figure at the foot of our bed, it was like we couldn't look away. like we weren't allowed to take our eyes off of it. For 10 whole minutes, we screamed in terror. Then the visitor turned and walked back out of the bedroom into the hallway, like it was late for work. The moment it left, Dara and I collapsed in our bed, only to stir and wake up 30 seconds later at the sound of our kids screaming. I think we were confused at first because, out of all the possibilities that existed for what we were going through, the visitor was nowhere near being on the list. Confusion gave way to dread when we realized that this was our reality, yet we couldn't remember anything. This had been plaguing us for months. We had absolutely zero memories of it, only what we saw on a videotape. It was like our brains were forcing us to repress the memories, to protect us from the trauma of just seeing the thing. But while our minds may have been protected, our bodies certainly weren't. The more the visitor came to us, the more our health was deteriorating. At this point, our hair was starting to go grey. Dread turned to panic when we had to deal with the notion that it might be visiting our kids in the night too. So we set up our video recorder outside their room and turned it to face down the hallway to our bedroom door. We left it there until we had an anomalous night, as Dr. Hargrove called them, and then we watched it. To our relief, we watched as it came up our stairs, walked into our room, left after 10 minutes, and then walked out and back down the stairs again, leaving Levi and Judah's room alone. To our curiosity, though, it went up and down our staircase, which meant that it was coming from somewhere downstairs. We debated about whether or not it was a good idea for us to keep filming the visitor, but in the end, we figured we ought to. It's not like stopping the filming was going to make us any healthier again. And plus, the thought that the more we learned about it, the better chance we stood of getting rid of it gave a sense of peace, and a smidge of confidence that we had some kind of control. At the very least, it gave us a direction to go in, something to do that was better than sitting on our hands wondering what to do. That night, I set up the camera in the living room and pointed it down the hallway towards the front door, as I assumed that's where the visitor was coming from, even though the doors were always locked before bedtime. The position of the camera was dead on, as we did catch the visitor, but the location was all wrong. At around 3:23 a.m., the door to our coat closet underneath our staircase opened up, and the visitor strolled right out. 10 minutes later, it walked right back in. The door shut behind it, as if a gust of wind had slammed it shut. That made no sense to us, but, well, nothing really did. The coat closet was literally stuffed with coats, hats, gloves, shoes, shelves, a vacuum, and snow gear. Our kids couldn't even enter it. How the hell was it possible that the visitor could? Where did it go when it went in there? We have no answers, only the reality. The visitor came from our closet somehow. What commenced shortly thereafter was a series of trial and error tests. We tried locking the closet door only to see the door burst open anyways. We placed our couch at the foot of the staircase, hoping it would deter the visitor, only to see it scale the couch like it was stepping over the curb, without so much as breaking its cold stare. We tried to leave all the lights on, but when it walked through the house, the lights would turn off wherever it happened to be. We even tried to rig a Home Alone-style trap involving a bucket of nails hanging over our doorframe, but they just bounced right off. And the ones that did manage to embed themselves in its body didn't even make it flinch. We were running out of ideas. We even tried staying with friends for a couple of weeks, just to get out of the house. They were going on vacation in Italy, and were more than happy to lend us their home. For 13 days, we got the best rest we'd gotten in a long time. But on our final night there, the pattern played out. Kids screaming, throats raw, nauseated, exhausted, another anomalous night. Hopeless doesn't really even begin to describe how we felt, knowing there was nowhere we could go to escape it. We were getting desperate. Oh, and just in case you're wondering why we didn't think of boarding up the closet in the first place, all I can say is that pride is a funny thing. Even while this terrible ordeal was draining us of our spirit and life, we didn't want the burden of having to explain to family and friends why our closet was boarded shut. We couldn't think of a story that made enough sense without making us sound crazy, so we tried to avoid anything that we deemed too out there, because we didn't want to be known as the couple who had 19 deadbolts on our bedroom door. In hindsight, though, I really wish we had swallowed our egos. We stopped recording a couple of weeks after that. There was nothing new we were learning, and I could tell that it was affecting Dar more than it was affecting me. It was breaking our heart knowing that the boys were crying at night because they were forced to hear their parents screaming their brains out from just down the hallway. We got the loudest white noise machines that we could afford to put in their rooms, and that helped, but Dar was still suffering. We were no place financially to sell the house and buy a new one. We felt stuck. The worst part was that I could see her wasting away. Dar was lively and bubbly before moving into the house. That's a big reason why I married her. She was so full of spirit. But it was getting to the point where I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen her smile. She was losing weight, losing sleep, and losing her sanity. It was so bad that I began to wonder if something different was going on. I began to think back to Dr. Hargrove, how she'd bludgeoned herself to death when she saw the visitor on our video recording. Why hadn't either of us tried to kill ourselves? Why were our brains successful in repressing the memories, but hers wasn't? What was different in our case? I had 0 ideas. That was the point I started getting angry. If you've ever seen the movie Paranormal Activity, there's a scene near the end where the guy, Micah, gets super pissed because the demon has been tormenting his girlfriend, Katie, relentlessly. Katie wants to reach out to a psychic, but Micah refuses and says something like, "This is my house, you're my girlfriend, I'm gonna frickin' solve the problem." That was the kind of rage I was feeling. It's a kind of rage born out of a sense of helplessness, but I couldn't do anything to get rid of the visitor. I couldn't do anything to help my wife. But I was angry, and I vowed that somehow, some way, I'd save my wife and get rid of the visitor for good. I'd save Dar. But if you've seen the movie, you know how it ends. 2 months ago, Levi got up in the middle of the night and called out for me. I went to check on him, and he asked me for some water. I went downstairs to get him his water bowl. As I was in the kitchen grabbing a cup, I heard the click of the closet door open. I froze where I was, unable to move, unable to breathe. And I heard footsteps trail from the closet up the steps and into my room. And that's when Darla started screaming. I wish I could tell you guys that I ran to her aid. I wish I could tell you that I sprinted up those stairs 2 at a time and drop-kicked the fucker. I wish I could tell you that all that anger and machismo I'd built up manifested in a last stand, but it didn't. I was so scared that I just sat down on the kitchen floor, cut my hands over my ears, closed my eyes, and just waited for it to be over. Tears streaked down my face as I pressed my hands as hard as I could into my ears, trying to drown her screaming out. After 10 minutes, the screaming stopped. I heard the footsteps trail down the steps, then I waited for the click of the coat closet to shut. But it didn't come. From where I was sitting, I knew I could look and see through the doorway to the bottom of the stairs. But I also knew that apparently just looking at it wouldn't snap my mind. But I swear, I felt it, like it was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, staring at me, waiting for me to look at it. I had to move my hands from over my ears to over my eyes to keep myself from looking. But when I did, I heard the strangest noise. It sounded like it was saying something. The same phrase, over and over again, really fast, under its breath. I didn't dare look at it, and the way it spoke made my skin crawl. But as I cowered there on the kitchen floor, I felt like I was starting to understand what it was saying. But before I could piece it all together, I heard its footsteps lead away, and the closet door shut. Immediately I sprinted up the staircase and into the bedroom, and I could see the vague outline of Dar laying in our bed. At that moment, the weight of what I'd just done really hit me. I couldn't believe that I was such a coward that I left her alone with the visitor. Even though I knew she wouldn't remember it, I resolved to confess to her when she woke up the next morning what had happened. My conscience wouldn't let me keep it to myself, so I slid into bed and snuggled up to her, reassured of my decision to tell her the following morning. But when I woke up in the morning, she wasn't in bed. I found her in the living room, slumped in front of the coat closet in a pool of blood. I can't really put into words what it was like finding her there. There really are none. I was afraid, shocked, ashamed, mortified, grieving, all at the same time. The memories of what happened next were a blur. My neighbor came over to keep the boys upstairs while her body was removed. Breaking the news to Levi and Judah was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. The following week we had a viewing, the funeral, the burial, all of it. Her family and mine came down to help me with our kids. They even stayed with me for a week, and during that whole time, the visitor didn't come. Of course it didn't come. To be honest, I wondered if the visitor would stop. I wondered if her death was what it wanted all along. After all, the entire week my family was here, it never came, and it always came at least twice a week. But that didn't make any sense. Nothing made any sense. I still have no clue what it wanted. It just stood at the foot of our frickin' bed and drove us insane, breaking our brains so much that our minds forced us to forget. It never attacked us. It never went after the kids. The only thing it ever did was stand there and take our wills to live. But for the time being, I was relieved, knowing that I was safe so long as my family was there. I was able to grieve well for a while, though it was still tainted with the constant fear that the visitor may show up. And so, I started recording again. 7 weeks ago, I woke up at around 3 in the morning and immediately vomited in the bed. I felt like my head had been bashed in with a brick, and my guts felt like they were boiling. It hurt to breathe. I went to the bathroom to hurl again in the toilet. When I finished and looked in the mirror, I noticed hundreds of scratch marks around my eyes, all puffy and bright pink. My hair was noticeably grayer as well. I cleaned up the vomit on the bed and threw the sheets, blankets and pillowcases in the washing machine, then took the tape from the camera. Probably should have waited until the morning, but it had never been this bad before. I had to see what had happened. At around 2:45 in the morning on the video, the visitor came into my bedroom just like it always did. It stopped at the foot of my bed and paused for a moment longer than usual and turned to face me. But rather than jolting upright and screaming, I slowly got up on one elbow, pushed myself into a sitting position, looked at the visitor, and began to weep bitterly. I watched as I placed my face into my hands and my shoulders heave as I began wailing into the night. After a few minutes, I started scratching at my eyes, trying anything I could to make sure I couldn't see it anymore. It was difficult to make out why I had such a visceral reaction, but then the visitor did something I'd never seen it do before. It looked directly at the camera, and I saw it. It was wearing my wife's face. Not a literal face, mind you, but like a mask made to look like her face. It was slightly wrong in all the places where it mattered. Her smile was wider. Her eyes didn't have the small creases in the corners, like she always did when she genuinely smiled, but rather were wide open and stiff. Her skin was a pale white, and she had dark gaps between all her teeth. It was like the visitor was mocking her and rubbing it in my face, that it finally got one of us. And now that it was looking at me through the camera, I could tell that it was only a matter of time before it got me. Then, in that moment, it suddenly clicked for me. I knew what the visitor was saying that night I cowered in the kitchen. She is mine. And so I boarded up that fucking door with as many pieces of wood I could fit over it, and then propped the back of the couch up against it. Then I asked my mother-in-law to watch Levi and Judah so I could drive to the nearest university that boasted a professor of occult studies, and had him give me all the symbols he knew of that were meant for protection, or to keep something from entering this world, or to keep something locked in a room. Anything I could get my hands on. But I didn't leave without telling her not to open that door. I carved every symbol I could fit onto those planks of wood, and it looks like at least one of them worked, for now. It's been a month, and I haven't been visited. I know this because I don't sleep anymore, but some nights between 2 and 4 a.m., I can hear movement in the closet, like the sound of someone wearing a large coat brushing his arm up and down the wood. Occasionally there's a loud thump, like it's thrown its shoulder against it, before that sliding sound resumes. I know it's in there. I don't know if it dematerializes when the light of day comes through our windows, or if there's some door to another dimension in my coat closet, or if it's just standing there, inches from the door, waiting for someone to open it and let it out. But I do know this. I will never move that couch. I will never take those planks off, and I will never, ever open that door. I don't know why it got dark. I don't know why the two of us lasted so long when Dr. Hargrove couldn't last a single viewing of a tape. I have an idea, though. I wonder if it was because Dar and I were together, that somehow the trauma was lighter on us because we had someone to share it with. So when I left her alone with the visitor, alone to take all of it by herself, because I was too chicken shit to face it again, it was too much for her. But at the end of the day, I just don't know. What I do know is this. Do not buy this house. I don't know if the realtors have to share stories like this, so I'm sharing it with you now. When I'm long gone and my boys have moved out and started lives of their own, let this house die with me. But if, for some reason, this story hasn't steered your way, if for some reason you must buy this house, then heed this warning, and heed it good. Do not open that door. Excerpt from Banned Report of Reporter Emma Lauren. Prohibited from the public domain under the Protection of Public Sanity Act, 2020. My name is Emma Lauren. I was a journalist and reporter for information redacted, and used to work all over the county. Now I'm nothing special, but I've got one hell of a story to share, even if it is the ramblings of a madman from the underbelly of the city. I got a lead from a friend, Michael, when we were at a cafe together one afternoon in August, and, well, I wish I'd never gone. The last days of proper sunshine were coming to an end, and the leaves were flecked with rusty colours in parts. I was fiddling with a pen, clicking it like a child, and just taking in the smell of coffee. Oh, that brown water that I can't get enough of. Don't even like the taste, really, just addicted, honestly. Well, what can you do? So he was telling me that there was this guy, really strange and furtive, who claims that he's being sent messages from every audio device he nears. Now, normally, I would have scoffed at the notion, but I just found this one case to be inherently interesting. Could be that I was lacking a real story at the time, but I jumped at the opportunity. Michael told me in a proud Polish accent, "Here, there's this fella going around the place telling everyone that he's been hunted by freaking demons." He paused to laugh. So did I. Last week, Friday, the tech meetup was on and there he was. Never seen him before that. Strange cookie. Dressed as if he was in the Matrix, he said, taking a sip of tea. He was being a little bit obnoxious. Started shouting that we had to warn people about the dangers of audio technology, not to connect to the internet. Said that they would enter us. We could never rid ourselves of them. Started sounding loopy. Got aggressive. So the big boy, yours truly, had to throw him out. I started to pry Michael for the information on the guy. I'm nosy. It's my job, okay? Come on. You've got nothing on the guy, I asked, teasing. Oh, I haven't finished yet, Emma. I had to get him out of there, and then I had to get him home. Thought he was on something, so I basically dragged him into my car. He freaked the fuck out the moment the sound system came on in the car. Good shit. Expensive, anyway. He covered his ears, and I was a little scared the guy was going to have a seizure or attack me. He told me, through gritted teeth, his address, which I recognized and drove him over. So, that's all I have. His address. He finished, smiling at me. A van drove past at speed outside, and I saw dust kick up into the air. Thank you, Michael. Times are a bit rough for me now. My last bit of work was a stink piece. This'll garner some attention. He stood up, pulling on a navy duffel coat. One thing, Emma. He doesn't use his apartment door. It's barricaded. He's made some sort of iron ladder from old satellite dishes and scrap metal, ran it down off the fire escape to the floor behind his building. Rough neighborhood, Emma. Won't be the strangest thing you'll see. He took out his phone, glanced at the white pillars of time, said, "Got to get moving. You've got my number. If you're in any trouble, give me a call, or if you just want to grab lunch sometime anyway." "Okay, see you around, Mickey," I said, watching him leave through the door and hearing the bell over him. This would be a good one, I thought, knowing I'd struck a vein of some mineral, whether it was gold or something else, and hadn't yet discovered. The address he gave me worried me a bit. Childhood rumors of the street called Arlene Avenue didn't exactly help its reputation. An urban environment with apartment blocks right outside the city boundary. It smelled of petrol fumes and spray paint, and every color of person went about with dour looks on their faces. I didn't feel out of place. This is the kind of place I grew up in, the North Side. Prime drug-pushing land and right for teenage gangs to blare out music at all hours. Needless to say, the whole place was a concrete cavity in the teeth of the working class, and you could always feel as if a bat shot could come out of the blue and break your face. Well, the place had a few characterizing features, mainly the graffiti and the chipper, but the road that passed through was quite busy, and if you drove past at the right speed, you could catch a glimpse of what appeared to be a terrifying sideways radio mast that reached the floor, imbued with all kinds of metal objects and weird bits. Barbed wire and scooters, aerials and tools, just out of sight of the road, going the whole way up and over the building into the sky. It was hard to believe the council hadn't taken it away. Then again, they did nothing but piss in the wind, so maybe not. The metal obscenity was the work of the man Michael spoke of, a local lunatic with a rep. The gangs here thought him a bit of a legend, so kindly added to his apartment ladder with various borrowed artifacts. As I was approaching the building, a stone obituary to a decade past, I quickened towards the side entrance, fearing that baseball bat that would crack my skull. There were cigarette butts and empty cider cans all over. The smell of piss wafted through the air, and the cars were loud on the motorway. Someone was cutting their grass nearby, and a tall black man stood by the gate, smoking a John Player Blue. I felt small and vulnerable in the street, So I went down the path to the back of the building. As I passed the smoker, he said to me, "Looking for the nutter who built that spire?" He'd seen right through me. My heart stopped for a second. I turned and was reassured. He was old, ancient-looking, with thick laugh lines around his brown eyes, his hair as white as Tipex scraped off a classroom table. "Yep, reporter. Got an interesting lead. Hey, you from around here?" I asked, comforted by the man's calm manner. "Sure am. My name's Abraham. People call me Abe. Been here since the place was built and all. Watched that crazy fucker build that, well, I don't know what it is, if it's not a radio mast for contacting aliens." Oof. He laughed heartily, and I did too. Inner city not got enough going on for you. No climate change protests, no neo-Nazis in the street. I explained to him that I hadn't got a good scoop in about 2 years now. I was on the verge of losing my job. That explains why you're here then. I'll catch you around. Give me a shout if you get into trouble. Emma, was it? Will do, Abe, I replied, walking forward and confronting the spire after a walk through a courtyard. I was struck by the size of it because he lived on the 5th and uppermost floor. One word came to mind. Colossal. The nervous excitement and sudden pang of anxiety, anticipation that I knew all too well, was crawling all over my skin like jittering beetles. The metal creature loomed and seemed to snarl. Just how it had never been taken down amazed me. I looked to notice that the thing had a sequence of metal plates and parts like a staircase to the man's room. I figured now was as good a time as ever, so I took the first few steps, and then there weren't any more. I was a quarter of the way up, and it dawned on me. The guy who built this, the nutter, intended it as a defense against people. Had I forgotten that he'd barricaded his door? No. I knew then that I'd have to climb. I looked around the grimy complex, void of the usual gangs, and started up the metal mass. I passed by the few dingy windows, one lit by candles and birds' feathers pressed to the glass. Unnerved, I went onwards. My current state of being not so fit, courtesy of too many days spent alone eating out in shithole fast food restaurants and grubby coffee joints, did nothing to help me in the climb, but I made it up to the top of the fire escape with minimal damage to my small hands. Embarrassingly out of breath, I stood at the balcony where the construct had taken me. Dingy old apartment, windows scratched and cloudy, and it would be a fair bet to say the place had never been painted before. I froze. In the window I'd been staring at, panting, there was a silhouette of a man standing on the other side. I prepped my questions in my head and walked straight up and knocked on the out-of-place iron door. "What do you want here?" a voice from the other side spat. It was clear to me from the beginning that this wasn't going to be an easy one, but this sharp tone of voice made that crystal. "Emma Lauren here, reporter for..." Information redacted. "I'm here because I heard you're the eccentric guy who built the tower outside, and that you've been warning people about audio tech. I'd like to do a story on it. Oh, and an interview with you will go a long way, I think." A man could be offended, you know. A stranger calls to call him an eccentric and to pry a report out of him. He chuckled a little. "Look, I don't mean to be offensive in any way. I'm sorry if I came on that way. Would you be up for an interview?" There was a pause on the other side, and I heard him walk away. I thought I was out of luck, when the door flew open with a whir. The smell of cigarettes made me gag a little, and there were so many consoles and screens, monitors and cables that I was dumbfounded. I might as well. Could help get the word out. Most of them won't listen, but it could help those who do. God help us. He walked behind and closed the door, bolting it again. He was tall, clean-shaven and dark-haired, but there were black rings around his eyes from apparent lack of rest. Other than that, he looked spotless and normal. I'd been expecting some sort of weirdo from the description Michael gave me, but I was wrong. He was in new tracksuit pants and a white tee, holding some sort of device like a modified walkie-talkie. "Hold still," he said, assertively, passing the thing up and down. "All good, now. You can sit on the couch." He came back a few minutes later with a tray, 2 respective cups of tea on it, put it down on the cheap IKEA table, and sat on an old, royal-looking chair across from me. I noticed all the speakers around, and wondered why he'd freaked in Michael's car, if that was the case. Then he said, "Look, lady, I ain't got much time to waste here, so I'm going to tell the truth and nothing but. I'm not crazy, however cliche it is to say that. I thought they'd listen, those guys at the tech show, but all I got was dirty looks and warning glances." I'd begun to write down what he was saying into my reporter's journal with a cheap big pen. "Can I ask your name, sir? And also, could you tell me exactly what you were trying to warn people about?" He looked over. A worried look overtook his face for a moment. "I want to stop it. We're going too far. We're going to invite them into our world. The radio static, interference, low hum from an inactive speaker. These things are not at all what they seem to be. My name's James O'Shea. I found them, and I won't be the last." The last sentence was spoken with such humility and concern that I was almost convinced. He was clearly a well-spoken and intelligent man. I had to keep my cool, though. "So, James, who are they, and how do you plan on protecting us?" I tried to sound as compassionate as possible, masking my disbelief. "I can show you, Emma, if you want. I warn you, once you see them, you can never go back to viewing things how you once did. I was hurt badly once." As he said this, he pulled his tee over his head, turning around to reveal a lean but muscular back. Oh, and 2 large dotted semicircles, one covering his shoulder, the other near his trap on the other side. Bitten. First time I'd ever come that close to one. Oh, they're large, hunched and oily black. Incredibly strong, hyper-intelligent and muscular. The thing had stood there, staring at me in a way that made me feel as only an ant might when faced with a human. I froze that once, and it tilted its head, inspecting me like a child does something it cannot gauge. Oh, I felt pure horror then, and it stepped forward, opened its maw at the neck, and needle-like teeth sank into my body slowly. Oh, I pulled forward in a moment of pure adrenaline and hit the power on the mains, which I have rewired. It was gone instantly. I was left crying, bleeding and terrified, puking in fear on the floor of this very room. He spoke to me, not at me like my usual prospects of good scoops, but really to me. If I'd been smart, I'd have thanked him and left then. Instead, I asked him to show me these creatures, which he called worldless. For his theory is that these things were without a world of their own, and were searching for a suitable home. I wasn't convinced. Of course I wasn't. It was a crazy story, I know. Believe me, I know, but the logical part of me said, no, this can't be real. Like Santa, God, rights and the Tooth Fairy, made up bogus bullshit lies. I wish I could look at the world now how I once did. Yeah, it was safe. No matter how bad and horrible things could get, it was so much more sane. Well, he backed over to the array of consoles and lights on the other side of the room. A mangled mess of cables like snakes tied in knots. Are you sure? I've only just met you, Emma. Is this what you really want? I nodded, writing in my journal. Okay then. Well, I've spoken with them once. They're eager to gain info about us and our world, probably to see if the place is safe to populate. Don't tell them anything if they pry you. Guess you'll be doing the opposite of what you're used to. Okay. Power on, AC in. Input, radio. He turned what I assumed to be a volume knob, and the static filled the room like a dense cloud. He looked frightened. I still waited in blissful ignorance of what was about to happen, what I was about to see. Keep your distance. I'll turn off the machine if you ask me to, or when I feel we're not safe. I've studied patterns in the static for some time now, and I learned their calls. The machine emits a similar frequency static to their language, mimicking one of them. Okay, get ready. At first, nothing happened. But then James's eyes turned to the hallway, in partial darkness. Mine followed to see two tall figures hunched in the apartment, fading into our world from another, something from nothing. And they walked forward. They were identical, except the one on the left had two sharp vertical horns on its head. Maybe they were ears. They were too black to know. I wasn't shaken by this, I think out of pure shock and disbelief at the undeniable fact that these things were standing mere meters from us and emitting an aura of pure superiority. I felt weak and vulnerable, and I'd say James did too. I stammered, and they looked at me, right into my eyes. And if they had any eyes themselves, I couldn't see them, but it was obvious that their attention was trained on me. Muscle memory took hold, and I reached for my recorder. I held it out and clicked it on. James had his hand on the power button, ready to flick it, but didn't. His eyes widened. The one with the horns held out a long arm and called me forward. Involuntarily, my body complied. I stepped over, a mere 4 feet from the things. It held out its shadowy appendage and touched my arm lightly. I felt at its mercy. It turned over my arm and held out my hand for me, as if to receive. Then, over my open hand, its own changed into a pipe-like orifice in a non-Euclidean motion or twisting shadows. A click could be heard from them. I gazed on in horror as a steady flow of flesh, bones, cartilage, and chunks of gold flew down onto my open hand, pouring steadily onto the floor. I jumped back in fright, snapping out of whatever trance the thing had me locked in, my heart pounding. I stumbled over the couch and fell. The one with the horns then stood up straight and pointed at me. The other creature lunged forward mechanically and reached out for me. James hit the beast over the back of the head with the broken leg of a chair, and it made several clicking noises, then screeched in what sounded like a louder, more sinister radio static that pierced our ears. He hit it again under the head, but each hit seemed to do nothing to it. James stepped in front of me and yelled to turn off the machine. "Turn off the mains now!" he screamed, as he was pinned by the tall thing, its strength overwhelming him entirely. Several black arms reached from behind it and pulled him to the thing's chest. I scrambled, terrified, to the console and flicked the power switch with all my strength. The power went out and the light disappeared, but the static remained, and any hope I had left of escaping this suddenly deadly scenario dissipated. I fell again, backing away toward the door, keeping my eyes on James being dragged into the darkness. Now the only light was the gentle glow of the streetlight outside, in the court through the filthy windows. Those things glistened in the dark, and the smell of rotten flesh floated like a mist. While the creature that had James was leaving toward the darkness, the other, the one with the horns, was humming a noise like an approaching train, its hands on the wall of the hallway. Bright white roots spread in the walls like veins, glowing, and my mind gave up on trying to understand any longer. I jumped up to my feet, not caring for the man I'd just met. My instincts had taken over. I pulled the lock on the door and flung it open, letting in the light of the setting sun and the streetlights. The horned one noticed my escape plan, however, and stopped touching the walls, sprinting forward in a most unnatural way that simply took my breath away. I got one foot on the metal construct outside, realizing now that the thick wires from the room were connected to it, and what that meant. This massive spire wasn't just a ladder. It was James's idea of a giant radio tower mast. I reached for the metal beams, and then I felt the impact of something large and hard knock the breath out of me. I fell forward, off the edge, and hit my head on the metal, falling unconsciously to the floor, far below. I have no idea how the fall didn't kill me. When I awoke, I was in a hospital room. My stuff was gone. Both legs were broken, and so was my right arm. My head was bandaged and painful. I couldn't really remember what had happened for a few minutes, and when I did, I began to doubt myself. It seemed impossible. Felt like a dream, but yet too real and vivid to be a mere dream. It made no sense. None of it. Especially the intentions of the man. James was gone now. Had he even existed? Why try and warn people of these things when it was clear that he'd been actively trying to contact them? For personal gain? Maybe he hoped to incite an interest in people by using reverse psychology. Maybe he... No. I'll allow my mind the rest it deserves. And now I only pray that I come near no radio static or anything of the sort in my life again, or that anyone will ever suffer the same fate as me or James. This will probably be the last report I make before they send me off to the loony bin. It won't even get published. At least I'll be safe in the silence of the padded cell. Until then, I'll stay here recovering and make sure no one turns on that little CB radio console in the hospital room. So, what did you think of those two? The first one I thought was brilliant, really, really nicely written. One from NOSLEEP that I was very, very happy to get permission to read for you all. And one from the Vault, the subreddit I set up so I could share the stories with you that you have all shared with me. So, how's it going, my dear friends? Doing okay? Well, something big coming up on Wednesday. Can't tell you yet. A bit of a secret. But I'm trying to revive my second channel. Do you know I have a second channel? If you didn't, then it's time you found out. I'm going to be doing a story there tomorrow night, and doing quite a few more from now on. Now, the second channel specializes in shorter stories, 10, 15, 20 minutes, as opposed to the longer ones I do here. So, if you're in the mood for something a bit shorter, that's where you should head. Okay, well, my dear friends, that is definitely enough for me for one evening. Until next time, very, very sweet dreams, and bye-bye. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time listening to me. Now, if you enjoyed the Dr. Creepen experience, then come find me on Facebook. Come chat with me on Twitter. Listen to the background music and download it if you like on SoundCloud. Drop by the store, pick up a t-shirt. And, importantly, if you've got a story you'd like me to read, send it to Dr. Creepen's Vault, the subreddit I set up so that I could read your stories. Now, looking forward to seeing you all again real soon. So, come check me out, okay?